The quiet study room had a velvet rope across its door, which was ridiculous because it was only a narrow glass box beside the north library stairs with one long table, 6 hard chairs, a cracked wall clock, and a sign that said priority use by final candidates. But on the morning I returned from death, that rope looked like a border between two worlds. On one side stood the academy's best students in polished shoes and perfect blazers, pretending they were above desperation, while their eyes kept sliding toward the empty room like dogs watching meat. On the other side stood me, holding the reservation card that had destroyed my first life. My name was printed on it in black ink. Alara Voss, room N3, 7:30 a.m. to 9 a.m., authorized by Academic Affairs. In my first life, I had guarded that card until my fingers cramped. I had believed the quiet study room would save me. Everyone said room N3 had the best light, the least noise, the strongest desk lamps, the cleanest air, the kind of silence that made memorized formulas settle neatly in your head instead of scattering like frightened birds. My mother had packed me breakfast and told me to protect my peace. My homeroom teacher had patted my shoulder and told me not to let anyone distract me. And Seraphine Hale, the class monitor, the golden girl with pearled hair clips and a smile sharp enough to cut silk, had told me in the sweetest voice imaginable, "You deserve that room, Alara. You worked so hard." That was how I should have known she planned to take it from me. Nobody at Ashwick Academy praised you unless they had already measured the easiest way to bury you. In my first life, I entered room N3 at 7:30 with my notes stacked in color-coded piles, my admission card under my water bottle, and my phone turned off exactly as the final candidate policy required. At 7:42, Seraphine knocked on the glass with tears trembling prettily on her lower lashes. She said her grandmother had collapsed. She said she needed somewhere quiet to call home because the corridor was too loud and everyone kept staring. She said, "Only 5 minutes, please. You know I would never ask if it was not serious." I opened the door because I was 18, exhausted, and still stupid enough to believe a girl could cry honestly in a hallway full of witnesses. Behind her came Mara, then Tilly, then 3 boys from the ranking squad, all speaking at once about stress, fairness, shared resources, and how selfish it looked for one person to keep a whole room while the rest of the class trembled before the provincial entrance examination. The conversation became a crowd. The crowd became an argument. Someone bumped the table. Someone spilled water across my notes. Someone said I pushed Seraphine. Someone else said I screamed first. By the time the librarian arrived, I was standing in the middle of ruined pages, while 20 classmates looked at me as if I had committed violence by wanting one locked door between myself and their hunger. Then the real knife slipped in. At 8:56, while I was still explaining, the academy sent the final sign and notice. All candidates had to report to the East Atrium before 9 o'clock to confirm identity, submit devices, and receive hall clearance. Room N3 was in the old wing, where the speakers had been disconnected during renovations. My phone was off. The wall clock was 4 minutes slow. Seraphine looked at it, looked at me, and whispered, "Oh no." We ran, but the gate sealed before I reached it. She made it through because someone had already signed her in as class monitor. I was marked absent, then unstable, then dishonest, then unfit for recommendation after her statement claimed I had refused to leave the room because I wanted to sabotage others. One quiet room became the coffin where my scholarship, my rank, and my future were buried alive. So when I opened my eyes again and saw the velvet rope across room N3, I did not feel grateful. I felt awake in a way that almost hurt. The corridor smelled of floor wax and expensive perfume. Rain tapped against the library windows. The old wall clock inside the room still lied with the same calm face, its hand sitting 4 minutes behind reality. My classmates were gathered in little islands of pretending, some whispering formulas, some highlighting notes they had already memorized, some filming short good luck videos for parents who thought effort and kindness were rewarded in equal measure. Seraphine stood near the notice board in a cream blazer that was not regulation but somehow became regulation because she wore it, her hair twisted back with pearl pins, her expression arranged into patient concern. She was holding a stack of sign and reminders, official blue slips from the examination office, but I noticed immediately that she was not handing them out. In my first life, I had never noticed that. I had been too busy protecting the room to see the weapon in her hand. The blue slips were the only paper notices for the early deadline because the electronic system had crashed the night before. The academy had printed them at dawn, given them to monitors, and trusted those monitors to distribute them. Seraphine kept them pressed against her chest like prayer cards. She looked at me through the crowd and smiled. I smiled back. Then I lifted my reservation card, tore it cleanly in half, and dropped both pieces into the brass recycling bin beside the door. The sound was tiny, but the corridor reacted as if I had slapped someone. A girl gasped.
One of the ranking boys said my name.
Seraphine's smile froze for half a second before melting into concern. "Ilara," she said, crossing the corridor with careful steps. "What are you doing?" I shrugged and picked at my bag, giving up the room. The words landed strangely. Nobody knew what to do with surrender when they had prepared all morning to call it selfishness. Seraphine glanced at the torn card, then at the waiting classmates, then back at me. I could see the calculation move behind her eyes, quick as a fish under clear water. If I gave up the room willingly, she could not stage the same argument. If she begged, she looked greedy. If she refused, the others would wonder why she had wanted me cornered there in the first place. "You should not make decisions from nerves," she said gently. "You reserved this fairly. Then I can release it fairly." I slid my notebook into my bag. "Anyone who wants it can fight the librarian, not me." A laugh trembled through the corridor, uncertain at first, then sharper. The room had always been a prize because it belonged to someone. Once I abandoned it, the prize became available, and availability turned my classmates into exactly what they pretended they were not. Mara stepped forward first, saying she had the weakest home environment. Tilly argued that she had panic attacks in noisy spaces. The ranking boys said group review would benefit everyone. Someone claimed Seraphine should have it because she was class monitor. Someone else snapped that class monitor did not mean queen. Seraphine raised both hands and said, "Please, everyone, we can resolve this calmly," while keeping the blue sign in slips hidden under her folder. I walked away before the first real insult flew. That was the second difference. In my first life, I stayed to defend my right. This time, I protected my future by letting them mistake the smallest object for the largest prize. The East Atrium was only 7 minutes away by the indoor route if you used the service corridor behind the archives, but almost nobody knew that because the Academy preferred students to walk the ceremonial halls lined with portraits of donors. I knew the service corridor because in my first life, after the gate closed, I had wandered the old wing in shock and found every shortcut too late. This time I moved through the narrow passage with my shoes quiet on concrete, passing stacked boxes of outdated textbooks, a broken trophy case, and a maintenance worker drinking tea from a thermos. He looked up when he saw me. "Final candidates go the other way," he said. "Not today," I replied. He glanced at my admission card and nodded, as if I had said something sensible. By 8:18, I reached the East Atrium, where the real examination process had already begun under harsh white lights. Long tables divided the room into identity verification, device surrender, biometric scan, and hall clearance. The sign and gate stood at the far end, silver and narrow, with a digital clock above it counting down to 9 o'clock. 42 minutes remained. The room was almost empty. A few nervous students from other classes stood in line, clutching passports and admission cards, while proctors arranged trays for phones. No golden girls. No ranking squad. No crowd. No one calling me selfish. For the first time in both my lives, I heard what silence sounded like when it was not a trap. At the first table, a proctor with square glasses took my admission card and checked my face against the photograph. "You are early," she said. In my first life, I would have apologized, as if arriving prepared were rude. This time I simply said, I wanted to avoid congestion. She stamped my clearance sheet and waved me to device surrender. I handed over my phone, power bank, earbuds, smart pen, and the cheap digital watch my aunt had given me the year before. The device officer sealed them in a transparent pouch and made me sign twice. At the biometric station, The scanner rejected my thumb the first time because my hand was cold, and for one dangerous second fear opened under me like a trapdoor. Then the officer handed me a tissue, told me to warm my fingers, and tried again. Accepted. My name appeared on the screen in green. Alara Voss. Present.
Cleared.
Hall B. Seat 41. A sound escaped me, small and ugly. Almost a laugh, but not quite. The officer looked at me over the monitor. You all right? Yes, I said, though I was not sure whether being all right could feel this sharp. Just relieved. He gave me a yellow hall pass and pointed to the waiting area beyond the gate. I stepped through at 8:31, 29 minutes before closure, and the gate clicked behind me with a softness that felt more final than thunder. On the other side were rows of plastic chairs, water stations, and a live display showing cleared candidates by name. Mine sat near the top. I stared at it until the letters stopped trembling. The waiting area had glass walls facing the atrium, which meant I could watch the trap close without standing inside it. At 8:37, a boy from the science division ran in, breathless, but cleared. At 8:42, 3 scholarship candidates arrived together, arguing about whether they should have eaten breakfast. At 8:47, the first message appeared on the atrium staff tablet. North Wing disturbance, library level, room N3. The device officer sighed and showed it to the chief proctor, who frowned but did not leave his station. At 8:50, a librarian hurried into the atrium with her hair falling out of its clip and spoke to security. Even through the glass, I could read enough of her lips to understand. Fighting, room reservation, students blocking corridor. The chief proctor pointed at the clock. The librarian shook her head. Security spoke into a radio. The gate continued counting down. 10 minutes.
9. 8.
My classmates were still in the North Wing, tearing each other apart over a room with a line clock while the only deadline that mattered marched forward in public. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt something colder and steadier. In my first life, I had begged those same people to let me through the crowd. I had shouted that sign and mattered. They had mocked my panic and said I was exaggerating because I hated sharing. Now their absence was not my revenge. It was their own decision made visible. The most painful truth about being framed is that you spend years imagining justice as lightning when sometimes it is only a clock doing exactly what it promised. At 8:53, Seraphine arrived at the atrium doors without the class. That surprised me for one breath, then amused me for the next. Of course, she had abandoned them once the fight stopped serving her. Her cream blazer was wrinkled now, one pearl pin missing from her hair, but her face remained perfectly arranged. She approached the identity table with the bright urgency of a responsible leader delayed by other people's chaos. I watched her present her admission card, her monitor badge, and the blue sign in slips she had failed to distribute. The proctor asked a question. Seraphine answered with a soft laugh. The proctor did not laugh back. Another officer came over. They pointed to the slips. Seraphine's shoulders tightened. She tried to gesture toward the North Wing, probably explaining that she had been helping manage a disturbance. The chief proctor looked at the clock, then at the stack in her hands. Even from behind glass, I saw the moment his expression changed. A class monitor holding undistributed deadline notices 7 minutes before gate closure was no longer helpful. It was evidence. Seraphine must have felt it too, because her chin lifted and her eyes swept the waiting area. They found me behind the glass, already cleared, seated with my hands folded over my bag. For the first time that morning, she forgot to look sweet. Hatred passed over her face so nakedly that the boy beside me shifted in his chair. She recovered quickly because girls like Seraphine were raised to make knives look like fans. She smiled at the proctor again, nodded as if accepting a minor correction, and moved toward the biometric line. For a moment I wondered if she would still make it. She was inside the atrium. She had her documents. She had not missed the deadline yet. In my first life, she had always landed on her feet because institutions loved polished girls who spoke gently while others bled. But then the north doors burst open, and my class arrived like a storm that had learned to wear uniforms. Mara was crying. Tilly was shouting that Seraphine promised she would handle sign-in. The ranking boys shoved forward with folders bent under their arms. Someone had a ripped sleeve. Someone else held the broken velvet rope like a dead snake. Behind them came the librarian, 2 security guards, and Deputy Warden Lorne, a woman whose silence could peel paint from walls. The atrium erupted. Students rushed the identity tables, waving admission cards and demanding exceptions. The digital clock above the gate read 8:57. 3 minutes. The chief proctor raised a hand and said something I could not hear, but I saw the shape of the rule in his posture. No crowd entry.
No bypass.
No clearance without individual verification. The class had become exactly the thing the early sign-in deadline was designed to prevent: a late, panicked, unsecured mass of candidates carrying devices, bags, notes, accusations, and excuses. Seraphine tried to separate herself from them. That was the moment everything broke. Mara grabbed her sleeve and screamed, "You said there was time." Tilly pointed at the blue slip still in Seraphine's folder and shouted, "You had those the whole morning." One of the ranking boys yelled that she told them the gate would stay open for room N3 candidates because the room was officially reserved. Seraphine's mouth opened, closed, opened again. She looked toward the proctors, then toward the glass, then toward me. I did not move. I did not smile. The worst thing I could give her was not anger, it was absence. Without me in the room, without me crying, without me defending, there was no unstable girl to blame. There was only Seraphine holding notices she should have distributed while the class she had controlled turned on her under cameras. At 8:59, the chief proctor ordered all uncleared candidates to line up by original arrival time. The students shouted that they had arrived together. Security said arrival meant processed arrival at the atrium, not presence somewhere else on campus. The clock changed to 9 o'clock. A soft tone rang through the hall. The silver gate lights shifted from green to red. The waiting area door sealed. Every uncleared name on the display moved from pending to Miss Sinian. It happened without drama, one line after another, until half my class became a column of red text. Mara put both hands over her mouth. Tilly sank onto a bench. Seraphine stood very still, her cream blazer bright among all that ruin. The exam itself began at 9:30, and I wish I could say I floated through it with the calm of a heroine who had already won. The truth was uglier. My hands shook so badly during the first section that my pencil clicked against the desk. For 30 minutes, every question looked like it belonged to a language I had once known and forgotten during death. Contracts, logic, ethical scenarios, statistical interpretation, everything blurred behind the memory of red names on the display. It took the smell of sharpened wood to bring me back. In my first life, after missing sign-in, I had sat outside the gate smelling pencils through the glass while the chosen students began without me. Now I was inside. Seat 41. Hall B, cleared. Present.
Alive.
I pressed my shoes flat to the floor and forced myself to answer one question, then another, then another. When panic rose, I used the method I had taught myself after my first fall. Name 5 facts no one can steal. My name is Alara Voss. My hall pass is yellow. My phone is sealed. The clock above the front board is accurate. Seraphine is not in this room. By the second section, my breathing steadied. By the third, the paper became only a paper, not a battlefield. When the final bell rang, I did not know whether I had topped anything. I only knew that every answer on my sheet had been written by my own hand in a room I had entered honestly. After a life ruined by other people's stories, honesty felt almost violent. We were held for 40 minutes after the exam while proctors verified scripts against clearance logs. Through the high windows, I could see rain thinning into silver threads over the courtyard. Nobody explained what had happened outside, but rumors travel through walls faster than sound. A boy 2 rows behind me whispered that an entire class had missed sign-in because of a fight in the old library. A girl near the front said a monitor had been caught hiding notices. Another claimed the quiet room was under disciplinary review because someone found torn blue slips in the bin. That last part was false. I had torn only my reservation card. But false details cling to true scandals like burrs. I kept my eyes on my desk until my name was called for release. In the corridor, a staff member returned my sealed device pouch. My phone buzzed alive with 31 missed calls, 97 class messages, and one direct message from Seraphine sent at 9:04. You did this. I stared at those 3 words for a long moment, then took a screenshot and forwarded it to the Integrity Office email printed on the wall poster beside me.
No speech. No insult.
No satisfaction typed with shaking thumbs. Just evidence sent where evidence belonged. A minute later, the message changed from delivered to read, and I wondered whether she understood that my second life had made me boring in the most dangerous way. I no longer wanted people to know I was hurt. I wanted records. The disciplinary hearing was scheduled for Monday because institutions love delaying disasters until after weekends, as if ruin becomes more polite with proper calendar spacing. By then, the whole academy had chosen sides, then changed sides, then pretended it had always been neutral. On Friday, the students who missed sign in flooded the family chat groups with complaints about unfair enforcement. By Saturday, parents demanded an emergency review. By Sunday, someone leaked a blurry video of the Room N3 fight, and the story became less about cruel rules and more about why 38 final candidates were wrestling over 6 chairs while the sign and gate was open across campus. On Monday morning, I walked into the administrative theater wearing the same navy blazer from exam day, cleaned, pressed, and plain. The room was colder than necessary. At the front sat Deputy Warden Lorne, the chief proctor, the head librarian, and 2 external observers from the Provincial Examination Board. Seraphine sat on the left with her parents and a legal advisor. The rest of the uncleared class sat in rows behind her, no longer united, no longer loud. They looked smaller in daylight. Mara's eyes were swollen. Tilly kept twisting a tissue until it shredded. The ranking boys stared at their shoes. When I entered, whispers moved through them like wind through dry grass. Seraphine did not turn around. She knew where I was anyway. The hearing began with facts, which are crueler than accusations because they do not need volume. The board displayed the timeline on a screen. 7:12. Blue sign in slips collected from Academic Affairs by class monitor Seraphine Hale. 7:30. Room N3 reservation active under Alara Voss. 7:34. Alara Voss releases room reservation by surrendering card to library desk. That detail startled me. I had dropped the torn card in recycling, but apparently the librarian had collected it when the fight started and logged it as abandoned. 8:18. Alara Voss enters East Atrium. 8:31. Alara Voss clears sign-in. 8:37. First disturbance report from room N3. 8:53. Seraphine Hale arrives at East Atrium carrying undistributed sign-in notices. 8:57. Majority of Class A arrives uncleared.
Ni got the closure.
Then came camera footage. The corridor outside room N3 appeared on the screen, grainy but clear enough. There I was, tearing my reservation card and leaving. There Seraphine was, not following, not distributing notices, instead stepping toward the room and telling everyone, we should decide together. The audio was poor, but not poor enough. A boy in the back groaned when his own voice came through saying, Seraphine said candidates in official rooms get late processing. Seraphine's advisor objected. Deputy Warden Lorne overruled him before he finished standing. Then they played the atrium footage. I watched myself arrive early and surrender my devices. I watched Seraphine arrive late with the notices. I watched the class spill in behind her like a broken dam. There is a strange mercy in seeing your own innocence from the outside. In my first life, I had replayed the day so many times that memory turned against me, whispering that maybe I had been selfish, maybe I had raised my voice too much, maybe I had deserved disbelief because I could not remain graceful while being ruined. But the camera did not care about grace. It showed sequence. It showed location. It showed who had what in her hands and when. After the footage, the chief proctor explained the early sign-in rule in the driest voice imaginable. The Provincial Examination Board required every candidate to complete identity verification before gate closure. No class monitor, teacher, or local administrator could promise extensions. Notices distributed at dawn were supplemental, not optional, and monitors were required to hand them out immediately. A failure to sign in meant automatic exclusion from the examination sitting. The rule exists, he said, to prevent precisely this kind of unmanaged group arrival, device contamination, and candidate coercion. Candidate coercion. The words made Seraphine flinch. She had expected to be accused of poor communication. She had not expected the board to name the thing she had built. When Deputy Warden Lorne asked me to speak, I stood carefully because my knees wanted to remember fear.
I did not tell them about death.
I did not tell them about another life where I missed the gate and watched Seraphine receive the recommendation that should have been mine. I told them only what could survive in a transcript. I said I gave up room N3 because I felt uncomfortable with the growing pressure around it. I said I left for sign-in early because the candidate handbook said clearance began at 8:15 and closed at 9 o'clock. I said I did not receive a blue slip from the class monitor, but I had read the handbook myself. I said I had no knowledge of any claimed late processing privilege for reserved rooms. Seraphine finally turned then, her face pale and bright with fury. That is convenient, she said before her advisor could stop her. You knew everyone respected your preparation. If you gave up the room, of course people would assume there was another reason. The room went quiet. Deputy Warden Lorne leaned forward. Miss Hale, are you suggesting Miss Voss is responsible for other candidates choosing not to report to mandatory sign-in? Seraphine's lips parted. The trap was not mine anymore. It belonged to language and she had stepped directly into it. If she said yes, she admitted the class had been following me rather than official policy. If she said no, she abandoned her defense. For once, even her beauty could not find the right answer. The class turned on her fully after that. Not because they suddenly valued truth, but because truth had become the only raft left floating. Mara stood and admitted Seraphine told them to stay near room N3 because the real information would be shared after she secured the space. Tilly said Seraphine warned them not to rush sign-in early because early candidates might be assigned worse seats. One of the ranking boys produced a message from Seraphine sent at 7:26. Do not go to the atrium until I say, we move together or lose leverage. Another student showed a voice memo where Seraphine laughed softly and said, Elara panics when isolated. Once she gives up the room, we control the morning. The advisor put his head in his hand. Seraphine's mother whispered her name as if saying it sweetly could drag the girl back from the edge. But the evidence kept coming, not from me, from the people who had once clapped while I burned. They had saved her messages because they trusted her. They had repeated her lies because she made them feel chosen. Now those same saved messages became stones in her pockets. By the time the board recessed, the question was no longer whether the missed sign-in would stand. It was whether Seraphine's conduct had crossed from negligence into organized candidate interference. The decision came at 4:40 that afternoon, posted first to the candidate portal, then read aloud in the theater, because parents had refused to leave. All uncleared candidates remained excluded from the examination sitting. Appeals based on room N3 confusion were denied because the published handbook and atrium signage were clear. Any candidate who had engaged in disorderly conduct, attempted coercion over facility access, or relied on unauthorized instructions from peers would be referred for individual review before any future sitting. Then came Seraphine. The board found that she had failed to distribute official notices, issued unauthorized instructions, encouraged candidates to delay sign-in, and attempted to shift responsibility after arrival. Her examination eligibility was suspended for 2 years pending provincial integrity review. Her class monitor commendation was revoked. Her leadership recommendation was withdrawn. The final line was the one that broke the room open. Due to documented interference with candidate access, Miss Seraphine Hale is prohibited from holding any student governance, examination support, peer mentoring, or candidate liaison role in any affiliated institution. Her mother made a sound like a chair scraping the crossbone. Seraphine stood so suddenly her folder fell open and blue slips scattered across the floor. Nobody moved to help her pick them up. Not Mara.
Not Tilly.
Not the ranking boys. Not me. I thought she would scream. I had imagined it sometimes during the years after my first life collapsed, though back then I did not know I would be given another chance. I imagined Seraphine finally losing her perfect voice, imagined her crying ugly tears, imagined everyone seeing the rot beneath the polish. But when the moment came, she did something worse. She looked at me and smiled. It was small, bloodless, and almost peaceful. "You still did not win," she said. "You only made everyone lose. That might have hurt once. It might have hooked itself under my ribs and dragged guilt through me until I apologized for surviving." This time I looked at the scattered slips on the floor and thought about the sign and display, my name in green, my phone sealed, my paper completed, my future no longer dependent on whether cruel people approved of my manners. "No," I said, quietly enough that only the front rows heard. "I stopped losing for them." Deputy Warden Lorne ordered Seraphine escorted out before the conversation could become another performance. 2 staff members walked her through the side door. She did not look back, but her shoulders were stiff in a way that told me she wanted to. Outside the theater, rain had stopped. The windows reflected the room back at us. Rows of students, parents, officials, and one empty chair where the golden girl had been. A week later, preliminary results were released. I did not top the province. That would have made a cleaner story, maybe the kind people like to tell over dramatic music, where suffering transforms instantly into brilliance and justice arrives wearing a medal. I placed 7th. 7th was enough for a full scholarship interview, enough for national recommendation, enough to open the door that had been slammed on my fingers in my first life. When I saw the number, I sat on the floor of my dorm room and cried so hard my roommate thought someone had died. In a way, someone had. The girl who believed quiet rooms saved futures was gone. The girl who mistook being needed for being loved was gone. The girl who would have stayed in a crowd begging enemies to be fair was gone. My mother called 3 times before I answered, and when she heard my voice, she started crying too. She did not understand why 7th felt like resurrection. She only knew that her daughter had passed. I let her believe that was enough. Some truths are too heavy to hand to people who only wanted to see you safe. By the end of the month, room N3 lost its velvet rope. The academy converted it into an ordinary overflow room with a broken printer, 2 filing cabinets, and a sign that said "No reservations permitted." Students passed it without lowering their voices. Nobody fought over the hard chairs anymore. The old wall clock was removed after the investigation noted its inaccurate time. I saw a maintenance worker carry it out in a cardboard box, its hands still sitting 4 minutes behind, still lying to no one. Seraphine withdrew from Ashwick before the next term. Her family called it a transfer. The portal called it administrative separation. The students called it whatever made them feel least responsible. Mara sent me a message apologizing for everything that happened around the room, which was not the same as apologizing for what she did, so I did not answer. Tilly avoided my eyes in the cafeteria. The ranking boys retook the exam, 6 months later under probation. Some passed. Some did not. Their lives continued, rearranged but not erased. That was the part no revenge story prepares you for. Justice does not freeze the world at the moment your enemy falls. The bell rings, lunch is served, rain dries on windowsills, and people begin editing themselves into victims before the ink on the decision is dry. On the morning of my scholarship interview, I arrived at the East Atrium early again. Not because I was afraid of missing sign-in, though fear has long roots, but because I had learned to like the feeling of being somewhere before the crowd decided what the place meant. The same device officer recognized me and raised an eyebrow. "Avoiding congestion again?" "Always," I said. He laughed and stamped my visitor pass. I walked past the silver gate, past the waiting chairs, past the glass wall where I had watched my old life fail to repeat itself. For a moment, I stopped and looked toward the north library stairs. From that distance, room N3 was only a pale square of glass with no rope, no crowd, no power. I thought about how small the trap had been. A room, a clock, a handful of undistributed slips. A girl praised into trusting the wrong silence. Then I thought about how small my escape had been too. 1 torn card. 1 early walk. 1 decision not to fight over a prize someone else had poisoned. People think revenge requires courage, but sometimes it requires humiliation. You have to let them think you are giving up. You have to let them laugh at the thing you abandon. You have to walk away while they call you weak, because the deadline that saves you is rarely announced by the loudest person in the corridor. It waits elsewhere, quiet and official, counting down whether anyone believes in it or not. There was one more thing I kept from that day, though nobody knew it. After the hearing, when everyone had left the theater and the cleaners were collecting abandoned tissues from the rows, I found one of the blue sign in slips under a chair. It had been stepped on, creased down the middle, and marked with the faint print of someone's heel. Report to East Atrium by 9 a.m., no exceptions. The sentence looked almost laughably plain for something powerful enough to rearrange 40 futures. I folded it once and put it inside the back cover of my handbook, not as a trophy, not as proof that I had won, but as a reminder of the kind of danger I had survived. The world does not always warn you, with villains laughing in doorways. Sometimes it warns you in boring capital letters on cheap blue paper, and the people who want to control you survive by convincing you that boring warnings can wait. Years later, when younger students asked me for advice before major exams, I never told them to find the quietest room. I never told them to protect their notes like treasure or trust the person with the prettiest clipboard. I told them to read the handbook themselves. I told them to check the clock that mattered. I told them to sign in before they argued, before they studied one more page, before they followed anyone who promised a shortcut dressed as kindness. And when they laughed because that sounded too simple to be wisdom, I smiled and let them laugh. The best lessons usually look boring until the day they save you. As for Seraphine, I heard once that she tried to rebrand herself as an education consultant, speaking online about toxic competition and institutional pressure. Maybe she believed her own story by then. Maybe she truly remembered herself as a girl ruined by unfair rules and jealous classmates. I did not watch the videos. I had no interest in letting her voice rent space in my second life. My name was on my own certificates now, my own application forms, my own door.
No velvet rope.
No borrowed room. No clock 4 minutes low. Just a future that opened when I stopped defending my seat at a poisoned table and walked, quietly, toward the gate that had always been waiting for me.